Before the first star was named and before time learned how to move forward, there existed a wheel that was never meant to be seen, a system erased from history and sealed inside forbidden grimoires, a zodiac not written in the sky but carved into flesh, memory, and fear, known only as the Black Zodiac. Unlike the zodiac of horoscopes and constellations, these signs do not predict love, wealth, or fortune. They predict loss, transformation, and the moment a soul stops being human. Each symbol on this wheel represents an ancient entity, older than religion and older than language, entities that do not guide mankind but choose it, searching for broken souls shaped by suffering, obsession, desperation, and pain. To be chosen by a Black Zodiac is to be offered power without mercy, knowledge without sanity, and survival without morality. But every gift carries a curse, and once the wheel turns in your favor, there is no return. The names of these signs were whispered in secret: the burned, the beast, the devourer, the damned, each marking a stage of descent, not into darkness but into truth. History tried to erase them, religions tried to silence them, yet the wheel always turns, awakening again in every era, not in the stars but in human behavior, in people who stop feeling, stop fearing, and stop being human. This journey will not rush the truth. We will open the wheel one sign at a time, revealing its origin, its power, its curse, and the kind of soul it chooses. Because once you understand these signs, you may begin to recognize them in ancient myths, forgotten legends, the shadows of modern life, and perhaps the most terrifying realization of all is not that these signs exist, but that one of them has already noticed you. Welcome to the Black Zodiac. The first sign of the Black Zodiac is known as the burned, and it is not the sign of fire, but the sign of survival through destruction. Ancient grimoires describe the burned as the soul that has already been consumed once and yet continues to exist, a being forged in pain rather than born into purpose. Those marked by the burned are not chosen at birth. They are chosen at the moment everything in their life collapses, when hope is stripped away, when betrayal leaves scars deeper than wounds, when loss turns memory into ash. The burned represents transformation through irreversible damage, a state where the soul has passed through suffering so intense that it can never return to innocence. Legends say that when the Black Zodiac awakens, the burned is always the first to rise, because destruction is the beginning of all dark evolution. The power of the burned is resilience beyond human limits, an unnatural ability to endure what should have ended a life long ago, granting strength, focus, and emotional numbness that allows its vessel to survive any environment, any torment, any horror. But this power comes with a curse, the inability to feel warmth, joy, or comfort in the way others do, leaving the burned forever disconnected from peace. Ancient texts warn that those who carry this sign often appear calm, silent, and controlled. Yet within them exists an unending internal fire, not one that gives light, but one that slowly consumes everything they once were. The burned does not seek revenge openly. Instead, it waits, observing the world with the patience of something that has already lost everything and therefore has nothing left to fear. In history, the burned is said to have manifested in survivors of massacres, cities reduced to ash, and individuals who walked away from events that should have erased them entirely. Their eyes are described as hollow yet unblinking, carrying the weight of memories that never fade, because the burned never forgets the pain that created it. The transformation into the burned begins with isolation, followed by emotional detachment and finally acceptance of suffering as identity, at which point the soul becomes immune to despair, but also incapable of hope. Occult scholars believed the burned was the most dangerous sign, not because it is violent, but because it teaches the soul to live without needing meaning, love, or forgiveness. To be ruled by the burned is to exist in a permanent state of aftermath, where the disaster has already happened and survival itself becomes the only purpose. And this is why the burned always stands at the beginning of the Black Zodiac wheel, because before a soul can become monstrous, demonic, or devouring, it must first learn how to survive being destroyed. The burned is not the end. It is the scar that proves the descent has begun. The second sign of the Black Zodiac is known as the Beast, and it represents the moment a soul stops pretending to be civilized. Where the burned teaches survival after destruction, the beast teaches dominance after humiliation. Ancient texts describe the beast as the awakening of the primal self, the buried instinct that humanity spent centuries trying to suppress, the hunger, the rage, and the territorial violence hidden beneath morality. Those chosen by the beast are not weak people. They are people who were once restrained, controlled, or caged by society, law, or fear, until the pressure of repression became unbearable. The beast awakens when a soul realizes that kindness has failed, patience has been punished, and mercy has been mistaken for weakness. This sign does not create monsters overnight. It strips away restraint slowly, replacing empathy with instinct and logic with dominance. The power of the beast lies in physical supremacy and heightened perception, strength beyond human limits, sharpened senses, accelerated reflexes, and an overwhelming presence that forces others to submit without words. But the curse is far worse than the power, because the beast erases restraint permanently. Ancient grimoires warn that once this sign takes control, the vessel begins to view the world as territory rather than community, people as threats or prey rather than equals. History associates the beast with berserk warriors, feared conquerors, and individuals who survived by becoming more terrifying than the dangers around them. Their transformation is marked by isolation, uncontrollable rage, and moments of clarity followed by savage instinct, where morality becomes a distant memory. The beast does not enjoy cruelty. It accepts it as necessity. It believes survival belongs to the strongest, and peace is nothing more than weakness disguised as virtue. Those ruled by the beast often struggle internally, torn between the remnants of humanity and the intoxicating certainty of raw power. But the longer the sign remains active, the quieter the human voice becomes. Occult scholars believed the beast was the most visible of all Black Zodiac signs because its presence can be felt in a room before it is seen, an oppressive energy that demands submission. To live under the beast is to abandon the illusion of fairness, to accept the world as a hunt where only dominance ensures survival. And this is why the beast follows the burned on the wheel, because once a soul learns how to survive destruction, the next evolution is learning how to never be powerless again. The beast is not chaos, it is control through fear, and the moment a soul realizes that fear is the fastest path to dominance, the transformation becomes complete. The third sign of the Black Zodiac is known as the Devourer, and it represents the moment a soul stops surviving and starts consuming. Where the burned learns endurance and the beast learns dominance, the Devourer learns hunger, not hunger for food, but for control, attention, validation, power, and existence itself. Ancient occult texts describe the Devourer as the sign of endless need, a state where emptiness becomes so vast that nothing ever truly fills it. Those chosen by the Devourer are often individuals who were neglected, ignored, or starved emotionally, people who learned early that the world does not give freely and that survival requires taking. This sign awakens when desire turns into obsession, and obsession turns into identity, reshaping the soul into something that measures worth by possession and influence. The power of the Devourer lies in its ability to absorb energy, emotions, loyalty, fear, even identities, allowing its vessel to grow stronger the more it takes from others. But the curse is eternal dissatisfaction, because no matter how much is consumed, the hunger never fades. Grimoires warn that those ruled by the Devourer often appear charismatic, persuasive, and irresistible, drawing people in only to drain them emotionally, mentally, or spiritually, leaving behind emptiness and dependency. Historically, the Devourer has been associated with tyrants, cult leaders, manipulators, and figures who built empires not through strength alone, but through control of minds and desire. The transformation begins subtly, with craving attention, then influence, then obedience, until the soul no longer recognizes where need ends and cruelty begins. The Devourer does not destroy openly like the beast. It erodes slowly, feeding on weakness and attachment, growing larger as others grow smaller. Occult scholars believe this sign was among the most dangerous because it disguises itself as necessity, convincing its vessel that consumption is survival and exploitation is destiny. Over time, empathy is replaced by entitlement, and relationships become resources rather than bonds. To live under the Devourer is to exist in a state of constant hunger, where fulfillment is always just out of reach, and the world is seen as something to be consumed piece by piece. This is why the Devourer follows the beast on the wheel, because once a soul gains power through dominance, the next evolution is learning how to feed on others to sustain that power. The Devourer is not chaos. It is addiction made flesh, and once hunger becomes purpose, the descent accelerates beyond control. The fourth sign of the Black Zodiac is known as the Damned, and it represents the moment a soul accepts guilt as destiny. Where the burned survives destruction, the beast claims dominance, and the Devourer consumes without end. The damned submits to punishment, believing it is deserved. Ancient grimoires describe the damned as the sign of irreversible choice, the point where a soul becomes fully aware of its sins, betrayals, and atrocities, yet no longer seeks redemption. Those chosen by the damned are not innocent victims. They are individuals who crossed moral boundaries knowingly, justified their actions once, and then lived long enough to understand the weight of what they had done. This sign awakens when remorse transforms into identity, when regret becomes a permanent condition rather than a passing emotion. The power of the damned lies in endurance of suffering, an unnatural ability to withstand pain, humiliation, isolation, and torment without breaking, as if punishment itself fuels their existence. But the curse is eternal self-condemnation, because no forgiveness, internal or external, is ever accepted. Occult texts warn that those ruled by the damned often seek suffering subconsciously, placing themselves in cycles of loss, punishment, and sacrifice, believing that pain is the only honest response to their past. Historically, the damned has been associated with fallen priests, disgraced leaders, traitors, and figures who lived long enough to watch their legacy rot. Their transformation is slow and heavy, marked by silence, withdrawal, and an overwhelming sense of inevitability, as if fate itself has already passed judgment. The damned does not lash out like the beast or manipulate like the devourer. It endures, carrying guilt like a chain around the soul, dragging it deeper with every step forward. Scholars of the occult believed this sign was essential to the Black Zodiac because it removes illusion entirely. No denial, no justification, only acceptance of consequence. Over time, the soul stops resisting suffering and begins to rely on it, mistaking pain for purpose and punishment for meaning. To live under the damned is to exist in a permanent state of sentence, where the past cannot be undone, and the future holds no absolution. This is why the damned follows the devourer on the wheel, because after consuming others, the soul must eventually face itself. The damned is not despair, It is judgment embraced, and once a soul stops seeking forgiveness, the descent becomes irreversible. The fifth sign of the Black Zodiac is known as the Hollow, and it represents the moment a soul loses the ability to feel anything at all. Where the damned accepts guilt as destiny, the Hollow goes one step further. It abandons emotion entirely. Ancient grimoires describe the Hollow as the sign of emotional extinction, a state where pain has lasted so long that the soul chooses numbness over suffering. Those chosen by the Hollow are not loud, violent, or visibly broken. They are silent, functional, and disturbingly calm. Individuals who endured loss, trauma, or repetition of disappointment until feeling became unbearable. This sign awakens when grief no longer hurts and joy no longer arrives, when the soul learns that emptiness is safer than hope. The power of the Hollow lies in emotional immunity. Fear, love, guilt, and attachment lose their grip, allowing its vessel to make decisions without hesitation, empathy, or internal conflict. But the curse is total detachment, because without emotion, meaning collapses, and existence becomes mechanical. Occult texts warn that those ruled by the Hollow often appear intelligent, logical, and composed, yet their presence feels cold, as if something essential is missing. Historically, the Hollow has been associated with executioners, interrogators, scientists without ethics, and individuals capable of acts that others could not commit simply because they no longer felt anything about them. The transformation is subtle and gradual, marked by emotional flatness, memory distortion, and the inability to connect, until relationships feel unnecessary and people feel interchangeable. The Hollow does not seek power like the Devourer or dominance like the Beast. It seeks silence, an inner void where nothing can hurt anymore. Scholars believed this sign was among the most dangerous because it removes the final barrier to cruelty, feeling. Over time, the soul forgets what it lost, mistaking emptiness for peace and numbness for control. To live under the Hollow is to exist without internal resistance, where morality becomes abstract and consequences feel distant. This is why the Hollow follows the damned on the wheel, because once guilt is accepted and pain is normalized, the next evolution is emotional shutdown. The Hollow is not despair. It is the absence of despair, and when a soul no longer feels the weight of its actions, the descent reaches a frightening calm. The sixth sign of the Black Zodiac is known as the Witness, and it represents the moment a soul stops acting and starts observing everything without interference. Where the Hollow removes emotion, the Witness removes participation. Ancient grimoires describe the Witness as the sign of detachment through awareness, a state where the soul has seen too much to believe in intervention, justice, or control. Those chosen by the Witness are not perpetrators or victims, but observers, individuals who watched suffering, betrayal, cruelty, and collapse unfold repeatedly until they learned that involvement only leads to pain. This sign awakens when a soul realizes that understanding does not grant power, and knowing the truth does not change outcomes. The power of the Witness lies in perception beyond human limits, the ability to see patterns, intentions, lies, and future consequences with terrifying clarity. But the curse is paralysis, because knowing everything removes the illusion of choice. Occult texts warn that those ruled by the Witness often appear calm, intelligent, and eerily composed, yet emotionally distant, as if they exist slightly outside reality. Historically, the Witness has been associated with chroniclers of atrocities, strategists who never fight, judges who never intervene, and minds that calculate outcomes without moral involvement. The transformation is gradual, first curiosity, then understanding, then detachment, until the soul no longer reacts. It only records. The Witness does not seek power like the Devourer or silence like the Hollow. It seeks truth without consequence. Over time, empathy fades not from numbness, but from inevitability, the belief that nothing can be changed. Scholars believe this sign was uniquely dangerous because it produces individuals capable of allowing horrors to happen while fully understanding them. To live under the witness is to exist outside blame and innocence, where everything is seen, nothing is stopped, and responsibility dissolves into observation. This is why the witness follows the hollow on the wheel, because once emotion is gone, the next evolution is awareness without action. The witness is not evil. It is neutrality taken to its absolute extreme, and when a soul stops believing intervention matters, the descent becomes silent, endless, and irreversible. The seventh sign of the Black Zodiac is known as the Betrayer, and it represents the moment a soul chooses survival over loyalty. Where the witness observes without action, the betrayer acts with full awareness of the damage it will cause. Ancient grimoires describe the betrayer as the sign of calculated treachery, the point where trust is no longer sacred and relationships become tools. Those chosen by the betrayer are not impulsive or chaotic. They are precise, intelligent, and emotionally controlled individuals who learned that honesty is punished and loyalty is exploited. This sign awakens when a soul realizes that attachment creates vulnerability and that betrayal is often rewarded faster than integrity. The power of the betrayer lies in manipulation, the ability to read trust, exploit weakness, and dismantle bonds from within, allowing its vessel to rise while others fall unaware. But the curse is permanent isolation, because once betrayal becomes identity, genuine connection becomes impossible. Occult texts warn that those ruled by the betrayer often wear masks of loyalty, friendship, or devotion, while internally viewing every bond as temporary and disposable. Historically, the betrayer has been associated with informants, political schemers, false allies, and individuals who survived by sacrificing others strategically. The transformation is gradual. First rationalization, then justification, and finally acceptance, until the soul no longer feels guilt for breaking trust, only disappointment when betrayal is not efficient. The betrayer does not act out of rage like the beast or hunger like the devourer. It acts out of calculation, believing that morality is a weakness exploited by the naive. Scholars believed this sign was especially corrosive because it destroys communities from the inside, leaving no clear enemy, only suspicion. Over time, the soul forgets what loyalty felt like, mistaking control for safety and deception for intelligence. To live under the betrayer is to exist in constant anticipation, always preparing for the next advantage, the next sacrifice, the next severed bond. This is why the betrayer follows the witness on the wheel, because once everything is seen clearly, the next evolution is choosing oneself regardless of consequence. The betrayer is not chaos. It is intention sharpened by self-preservation, and when survival becomes justification, the descent turns cold, strategic, and irreversible. The eighth sign of the Black Zodiac is known as the Architect, and it represents the moment a soul stops reacting to the world and begins designing it. Where the betrayer sacrifices others for survival, the architect reshapes reality so survival is never questioned again. Ancient grimoires describe the architect as the sign of calculated order, a mind that no longer believes in chaos, coincidence, or fate, only structure, systems, and inevitability. Those chosen by the architect are not impulsive or emotional. They are thinkers, planners, and observers who learned that power does not come from strength or manipulation alone, but from controlling the framework in which others are forced to live. This sign awakens when a soul realizes that true dominance is not ruling people, but designing the rules they must obey without realizing it. The power of the architect lies in foresight and construction. the ability to predict outcomes, engineer scenarios, and build invisible cages made of laws, beliefs, routines, and dependencies. But the curse is dehumanization, because once everything becomes a system, people stop being individuals and turn into variables. Occult texts warn that those ruled by the architect often appear visionary, calm, and intelligent, admired for their planning and leadership, while internally viewing humanity as material to be shaped, corrected, or removed. Historically, the architect has been associated with empire builders, social engineers, secret planners, and minds behind regimes who never appear on the battlefield yet decide its outcome long before it begins. The transformation is silent and internal, marked by obsession with control, intolerance for unpredictability, and a growing belief that freedom is inefficient. The architect does not crave cruelty like the beast or hunger like the devourer. It craves precision, believing suffering is acceptable if the system functions. Scholars believed this sign was among the most terrifying because it creates worlds where evil feels orderly and oppression feels logical. Over time, empathy is replaced by optimization, and morality becomes a flaw to be engineered out. To live under the architect is to exist above the chaos, watching lives unfold exactly as planned, untouched by guilt, because everything is necessary. This is why the architect follows the betrayer on the wheel, because after trust is broken and bonds are severed, the next evolution is building a reality where trust is no longer required. The architect is not madness, it is control perfected, and once a soul believes it understands how the world should function, the descent becomes permanent, cold, and absolute. The ninth sign of the Black Zodiac is known as the heretic, and it represents the moment a soul rejects truth itself. Where the architect designs order, the heretic destroys belief not through chaos, but through doubt. Ancient grimoires describe the heretic as the sign of ideological rupture, the force that turns faith into weakness and certainty into chains. Those chosen by the heretic are not ignorant rebels. They are intelligent minds who studied belief deeply enough to see its fractures and chose to exploit them. This sign awakens when a soul realizes that controlling reality does not require systems or power, only the ability to make others question what they think they know. The power of the heretic lies in corruption of meaning, the ability to dismantle religions, ideologies, loyalties, and truths by exposing contradictions and offering alternatives that feel liberating, but lead nowhere. But the curse is absolute isolation, because once all belief is destroyed, nothing remains to stand on. Occult texts warn that those ruled by the heretic often appear charismatic, articulate, and enlightened, inspiring others to abandon old values while offering no stable foundation in return. Historically, the heretic has been associated with forbidden philosophers, cult founders, false prophets, and figures who fractured civilizations not through violence, but through ideas. The transformation begins with curiosity, evolves into skepticism, and ends in deliberate dismantling until the soul no longer believes in truth, only influence. The heretic does not seek control like the architect. It seeks collapse, believing that meaning itself is a lie used to enslave minds. Over time, certainty becomes contemptible, faith becomes weakness, and conviction becomes manipulation. To live under the heretic is to exist in a state of permanent contradiction, where nothing is sacred and everything is negotiable. This is why the heretic follows the architect on the wheel, because once reality is engineered, the next evolution is teaching others that reality was never real to begin with. The heretic is not ignorance, it is weaponized doubt, and when belief collapses, the descent enters its most dangerous intellectual phase. The 10th sign of the Black Zodiac is known as the Sovereign, and it represents absolute control disguised as order. Where the heretic destroys belief, the sovereign replaces it with authority so complete that resistance feels meaningless. Ancient occult texts describe the sovereign as the sign born when chaos becomes unbearable and the soul willingly kneels in exchange for structure. Those chosen by this sign are not tyrants by impulse, but architects of dominance, individuals who understand that true power does not come from violence, but from making obedience feel inevitable. The sovereign awakens when a soul realizes that freedom is unstable and that people crave chains as long as they are beautifully forged. This sign governs systems, hierarchies, laws, and empires built not on fear alone, but on dependency, where survival itself becomes permission. Its power lies in normalization of control, turning surveillance into safety, obedience into virtue, and submission into peace. But the curse is eternal vigilance, because absolute control demands constant enforcement, and the ruler becomes imprisoned by their own system. Grimoires warn that those ruled by the sovereign often appear calm, rational, and visionary, speaking in the language of unity while quietly erasing individuality. Historically, this sign has been linked to emperors, authoritarian leaders, shadow councils, and unseen forces that shaped civilizations through policy rather than bloodshed. The transformation begins with responsibility, evolves into regulation, and ends in domination until the soul no longer remembers a world without command. The sovereign does not rage like the beast, nor manipulate belief like the heretic. It governs silently, allowing no alternatives to exist. Over time, compassion becomes inefficiency, dissent becomes disorder, and control becomes morality. To live under the sovereign is to exist inside a perfectly maintained cage, where rebellion feels illogical and obedience feels safe. This is why the sovereign follows the heretic on the wheel, because once belief collapses, authority must replace it. The sovereign is not cruelty, it is perfected order, and when control becomes total, dissent no longer feels like falling, but like standing still forever. The 11th sign of the Black Zodiac is known as the fracture, and it represents the moment absolute control begins to fail from within. Where the sovereign perfected order, the fracture exposes its weakness, the truth that no system, no matter how controlled, can remain whole forever. Ancient grimoires describe the fracture as the sign of internal collapse, born not from rebellion, but from pressure. Those chosen by this sign are often survivors of rigid systems, individuals who lived under rules so strict that their minds began to split in order to endure them. The fracture awakens when obedience becomes unbearable, and the soul can no longer reconcile who it is with what it is forced to be. This sign governs contradiction, psychological division, and the silent breaking of identity under prolonged control. Its power lies in destabilization, the ability to exist in multiple conflicting states at once, to obey outwardly while unraveling inwardly. But the curse is fragmentation, because once the self breaks, it can never fully return to its original form. Occult texts warn that those ruled by the fracture often appear functional, even loyal, while internally divided into versions that no longer recognize each other. Historically, this sign has been associated with defectors, double agents, dissidents, and individuals whose minds splintered under surveillance, ideology, or absolute expectation. The transformation begins with doubt, evolves into compartmentalization, and ends in identity collapse, until the soul becomes a collection of fractured selves rather than a single being. The fracture does not overthrow authority like a revolution. It erodes it quietly, allowing cracks to spread unnoticed until collapse becomes inevitable. Over time, truth becomes relative, memory becomes unreliable, and the concept of a unified self dissolves. To live under the fracture is to exist between obedience and resistance, sanity and madness, loyalty and betrayal. This is why the fracture follows the sovereign on the wheel, because once control becomes total, the only escape left is internal division. The fracture is not chaos. It is pressure made visible, and when the mind breaks, the system that created it begins to break as well. The 12th and final sign of the Black Zodiac is known as the Void, and it represents the end of identity, belief, control, and resistance, the point where nothing remains to fracture. Where the fracture broke the self into pieces, the void removes the self entirely. Ancient grimoires describe the void not as darkness, but as absence, the state beyond fear, beyond thought, beyond meaning. Those claimed by this sign are not destroyed, they are erased. The void awakens when a soul has lost belief, surrendered freedom, fractured identity, and finally realizes there is nothing left to protect. Its power is total dissolution, the ability to exist without desire, memory, or selfhood, becoming a silent observer rather than a participant in reality. But the curse is absolute emptiness, because once the self disappears, so does purpose, choice, and experience. Occult texts warn that those ruled by the void appear disturbingly peaceful, detached from pain, pleasure, love, and survival itself, moving through existence as if gravity no longer applies to them. Historically, the void has been associated with ascetics who vanished, civilizations that collapsed without war, and individuals who walked away from everything without leaving a trace. The transformation begins with surrender, evolves into detachment, and ends in erasure until the soul no longer perceives itself as separate from nothingness. The void does not conquer, rule, or rebel. It simply remains, untouched by consequence or causality. Over time, reality loses texture, memory fades into abstraction, and existence becomes a quiet, endless stillness. To live under the void is to exist without suffering, because there is no longer a self to suffer. This is why the void sits at the end of the Black Zodiac wheel, because after guilt, hunger, belief, control, and fracture, the final evolution is disappearance. The void is not death. It is what remains when even death no longer matters. And now the wheel stands still. No more signs remain to be named, no more descent left to witness. What began as guilt, hunger, belief, control, and fracture has ended here, in silence. The Black Zodiac was never meant to predict fate, only to reveal how it erodes. Each sign was not a monster, but a mirror, reflecting what happens when the human soul is pushed beyond its limits. If any of these signs felt familiar, it was never coincidence. The ancient texts warn us that the wheel does not disappear once seen, it only waits. And somewhere, in the quiet moments between thought and thought, the Black Zodiac continues to turn, not above us, but within us,